Welcome to USA Test Prep 201, Creating Assessments. Before we begin, go ahead and make sure you have a copy of the Creating Assessment notes nearby so that you can jot down any questions or takeaways that you have from the webinar. So hopefully you've gone through session 101 of how to get your classes created and the different instructional resources that you have access to. And this webinar we're going to go through how to create different types of assignments and benchmarks. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get logged in. And again, notice that I do have classes already created. If you don't have classes created, then it will be beneficial to go ahead and get those set up before you start creating assignments and benchmarks. We're going to go ahead and get started by creating different types of assignments. Within the Assignments tab, you have a link at the top to create new assignment. We have two types, single and group. We're going to go through the single assignment first, and it's just what it sounds like. We're assigning one activity to students. Next, you'll select what classes, and you can select more than one class, or you could even narrow it down to specific students if you needed to. I'm going to go ahead and select this entire class and continue to step 2, where you will give this assignment a title. Next, you'll select what type of assignment you want students to work on. We have different types of tests. These tests include a small, medium, large, and full test. These are all going to be tests that will cover every single standard for your content area, and they're going to be randomly generated for every student. So in other words, if you were to assign, let's say, a medium test to students, they will all have the same number of questions, but the questions themselves are going to be different from one student to the next. And because of that, you're not going to have a traditional answer key or the ability to print these types of practice tests just because there is not one version of them. Next, you have a specific strand test. This allows you to go in and narrow it down to a specific standard that you want the questions to come from. Because again, the small, medium, large, and full test will pull questions from all standards, but you may want to narrow it down to just one. Next, we have a benchmark test that you can assign, and the benchmark test is kind of the complete opposite of the random test. And the reason for that is because with the benchmark, all students have the exact same questions as one another. And so because of that, you can print, you do have an answer key, and you get a lot more data afterwards with your student results. And we'll go through the steps for how to create a benchmark in just a few minutes. Now, in addition to a test, you have different practice assignments. For these practice assignments, you have practice questions where students will go through questions one by one, and they can have access to a hint if they would like to use a hint, and they get feedback after every question. And let me show you some of the different options for the questions. Let me go in first, choose my subject area here where it says test. And for the questions, you can decide if you want multiple choice, short answer questions, or free response. So we have different formats. I'm going to stick with multiple choice. And if you're selecting multiple choice, you can also adjust the difficulty. Usually our default is random. However, if you need an easier or more difficult set of questions, you can change that. Next, you'll choose what standard you want the questions to come from, and you can either pick all within that standard, or you can go further and pick a very specific area that you want the questions to cover. Next, in addition to questions, we have vocabulary that students can practice with, where they will be given a definition or description of the word, and they have to type in the word. We do take into account alternate terms or some variations in spelling. Next, we have crossword puzzles that can be assigned. Again, you can choose a specific standard, and then you can preview the puzzles if you'd like to. And then students, in this case, would have to complete the crossword puzzle. All right, next, in addition to puzzles, we have performance tasks, which are going to be a little bit more interactive type of activities for students to work on. Again, you'll pick your standard, and then you'll have all of your performance tasks to choose from. The first thing that you have here in the description is what type of performance task it is. Here you can see I have labeling, highlighting, classifying, matching. We have a bunch of different kinds of these on the site. And if you want to preview one before you assign it, just click on it, and you'll be able to see what that would look like for the students to work on. Now, you may have already assigned one of these before, and if that's the case, you'll see a little pink P next to the title to let you know that you've already given that one to your class. Next, in addition to the different practice activities, we have games that can be assigned where you pick your theme, and then students have to go through, answer questions, and play the game. And finally, we have videos that can be assigned as well. For a video, you just pick your standard. You have the title. You can see how long that video will last. And if you want to preview the video beforehand, just click on it, and you can watch it and see the questions that the students will have to answer after watching that video. So those are all the options when you're assigning a single assignment. Now, you can still assign all of these same type of assignments through a group assignment. But let's just say I only want to assign just one set of practice questions right now. I'm going to choose my standard and go to the very last step, which is your settings. And the first thing to decide is when you want this assignment to start. And if you were to select a start date in the future, so if I want this to start, a couple weeks from now, I'll get a pop-up to let me know that students cannot see that assignment until the start date, which is perfectly fine. That way you can plan and create assignments in advance. And then you'll choose when you want this to be due. Next, you can choose whether you want to share this assignment or not. If you click to share the assignment, then other teachers within your department will be able to view this assignment, and they can give it to their students if they would like to. Next, we have some options if you want to allow multiple attempts to improve score, if you want to require a minimum score, or have students retest what they missed. And I'm going to explain these settings in more detail when we go through the group assignment. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save the assignment. It has been created. So if I go back to my assignments tab, here at the very top is the one I just created. And it's a single assignment, so I can see right here what it's called, what type of activity it is. And if I click on it, this will give me a little bit more detail, such as the level of difficulty, exactly when the start date is as well. All right, now we're going to go ahead and go back and create a new assignment again, but this time we're going to go through the group assignment. And I'm going to go and select my class, or again, multiple classes, and give the assignment a title. Next, where it says choose test, you'll just choose your subject area. And then now you're going to see a lot of this is going to look the same as far as what different options you have. So this first section, you do have some different tests that you could assign as part of your group assignment. Again, these are all the same tests that you can assign individually as well. I'm not going to add a test for my group assignment. I'm just going to go straight to practice and pick a standard. And once you pick a standard, you then have all of those same type of activities that we just went through listed here. So all you have to do is click the checkbox if you want questions, vocabulary, free response questions, which the free response questions are going to be more open-ended, just like they sound. And because of that, the free response questions are the one thing on our site that are not automatically graded. So just keep that in mind. However, we do provide an answer key for all of them. Next, you have your performance task that you can assign. You have videos as well, puzzles, and games. So you have all of the same options here. The one thing that you do not have are some of the specific settings. So, for example, for practice questions, there's nowhere on here that you can specify if you want a more difficult set or a beginner set. By default, it's going to choose random difficulty. So if that is something that you are needing to adjust specifically for your students, then you would want to create a single assignment for practice questions. All right, so as you can see, I can add whatever combination I would like to here. At the bottom, you have a link to add more practice to go into another standard completely. So that way you can build this up however you need to. Over in the top right corner, you do have something to help you keep track of how many assignments are in this group assignment. Right now, I can see there are 13. We have a limit of 100, and we may consider lowering that maximum just because when a student sees that many assignments as part of a group assignment, it can be a little overwhelming, as you can imagine. So I'm just going to keep it at 13 right now, and I'm going to go to the next step, which is again our settings. So the first thing I have is the start date, so I'm going to go ahead and select that, and the end date. And you can choose a specific start or end date for each assignment here, or you can use the copy first row link at the very top, and that's going to fill in those dates for all the assignments. Now, next, you have the different settings that we already saw earlier when we created a single assignment, but this time I want to go ahead and explain the difference between them. The first one is to allow multiple attempts to improve score. If you would like to give students the chance to go back and do an assignment multiple times, you can give them a certain number of attempts, or you can even leave it unlimited. They are having to redo that all over again from the beginning. So in the case of where it says random practice for the practice questions or the vocabulary, that means that each time they're getting a random set of questions. That is not to say that they will not see some overlap of the questions, but it's not going to be an exact match for what they just went through. Now, the flip side to that is if you want students just to retest what they actually missed, then you can give them that option on the far right. And what this one will do is, let's say a student missed 4 out of 10 questions. Now they have a chance to go back through just those 4 questions to answer them again. And if you are concerned that students would have seen the answer, because typically we do show the correct answer in practice questions, when you allow students to retest, they will not have seen the correct answer beforehand. Obviously, that would be counterproductive if they've already seen the right answer. So please know that they will not have yet seen the correct answer. Now, the last setting option that you have is a minimum score. And so if you like to make sure that students reach a certain score before they can move on to the next activity, you can set a minimum score for them. And you'll get a pop-up to let you know that students will now have unlimited attempts. And so the reason for that is because if a student does not meet the minimum score, then the assignment is not considered complete. And if it's part of a group assignment, the student has to complete the first assignment before they can move on to the second, and they have to complete that one before moving on to the next. So it builds up sequentially from one assignment to the next. So we will give them unlimited opportunities to make that minimum score. All right, now it's just a matter of going through and choosing your settings, for each assignment the way you want. And once that looks good, at the bottom, you can decide if you want to keep these in a specific order, which is typically the more popular choice, or you could allow students to work in any order that they would like to. But let's say you do want a specific order and you really want the video at the beginning, just for some review before they start practicing. You can just click on it and drag it in place where you want it to go. And that way, if I want the game at the end, I can move it down here. It just gives you a lot of flexibility over how you want students to work on this. And then again, you have the option to share this assignment, so that if you've gone through and taken the time to make this assignment and you feel that other teachers at your school would want to use it, then you can click to share it. Okay, now the assignment has been created. So if I go back to assignments, here's that group I just created. And if it's a group assignment, you will have to click to expand it, and that will show you everything that is included. And if you ever change your mind, it's very easy just to use the pink X over on the right, and you can delete just that particular activity without affecting the rest of the group. Also, for your assignments, you have some different settings. And so within the options menu for all of your assignments, you can, if you want to preview, so if you want to see what that would look like from the student perspective, just click preview and that's going to open it for you. Just keep in mind that if you're going through random questions, then the questions that you go through are not necessarily going to be the same ones that the students will see. Again, it's just giving you an idea for the format for that assignment. Also, you can go into your settings, and within here, you can rename the assignment if you want to. You can also change when you want the assignment to start or be due. You can change your settings, and you can even change what students or what classes should be assigned this particular activity. We do have something called Reset Attempt Counter over here on the right. This is useful in case you have a student who turned in an assignment, but you need to allow them to redo it, but it's only set for one attempt. If you need to allow the student to redo it, just check the box by their name and then click to save it, and that's going to allow them to go back in and do the assignment. Now for a group assignment, you have an options menu for each particular assignment here. You have not quite the same amount of settings. As you can see, it's going to be a little bit reduced as far as what you can do if you go into an individual assignment within a group. If you go into the main settings for that group, that is where you can change the title, who it's assigned to, and you also have the reset attempt counter here. However, the reset will affect the entire group assignment. So if a student, if you need to reset what they did at the very beginning of the group assignment, that would be a useful thing to do for them. However, if they've gone through an entire group assignment and what you need to reset is at the very end, if you were to use this, it's going to wipe out everything that they did. So just please know that. Our programmers are looking into being able to reset just for individual parts of a group assignment without affecting everything. But just know that's why you only see it within the main group setting. Also within your assignments, if you ever decide you want to archive something just to get it off of your main screen here, that's something you can do. And when you come to filter your assignments, you can switch this from current to archived and be able to retrieve that. Now, earlier we shared assignments, and so let's say you're logging in and you know that other teachers at your school have shared assignments and you'd like to be able to go in and find those. What you can do is within your assignments tab, click the Browse Shared Assignments link, and this is where if any teachers within your department have shared an assignment, you'll be able to see it here. Now currently there's nothing that's been shared, and if you are confident 100% sure that another teacher shared something, you may want to check what content areas you have your classes associated with, because that's how we determine who sees which assignments. So for example, if you have your class set up for ninth grade math and the teacher created their shared assignment for 10th grade, then you would need to associate your class with 10th grade in order to see that. But when you have a shared assignment here, you can see which teacher created that assignment, and you'll have a button to assign it to your students. And then it's very easy to go through, and you have the option to make changes if you'd like to. So let's say the original teacher, they wanted a minimum score, but for your students, you would rather allow multiple attempts. You can go in and change that. And it will not affect what the original teacher did. All of their settings and everything will remain perfectly the way that they chose them initially. All right, so that's the assignments tab. Again, that's a really great way to give your class practice, over lots of different standards, using several different types of activities to reinforce what they're doing in the classroom. Now, the next thing we're going to go through and create are benchmarks. And this is our most popular feature on the site because of all of the extra options that you have with a benchmark. So I'm going to go ahead and click to create new benchmark here and give this benchmark a title. And you can decide whether you want to create the benchmark just for yourself, or you can click shared benchmark, which will allow other teachers within your department to have access to and assign this benchmark to their students. That way you can have a common assessment where only one teacher has to go in and initially create that benchmark. Next, I'm going to go ahead and choose my subject area here. And then you have some different settings that are unique for a benchmark. The first one is if you want to allow students to see the questions and answers when they're done. The reason that we have this for a benchmark is because all students have the exact same questions, and so a lot of teachers do not want them to be able to see the questions and answers once they're done in case other students are still working. And that is something that you can always go back and change later. But initially we do recommend that you leave that at no. We have a Spanish option. And this does not automatically translate the benchmark into Spanish. It just simply gives students the option to view it in Spanish if they need to. We have a random order, which is helpful if students are taking this side by side in a computer lab setting. This will shuffle the questions around so that way they're seeing everything in a different order. And finally, you can reduce the number of answers from 4 to 3. Now the next step is where you can decide how you want your questions generated, and we have two options, basic or custom. If you pick basic, this is going to choose the questions for you. All you have to do is decide how long you would like the benchmark to be. And if I pick a different length here, in the top right corner, this is going to show me how many questions will be on that benchmark. So in this case, for my specific content area in my state, the large size test will have 34 questions. Now, whether you choose the actual test length or the small test, the composition as far as what standards are on there will not change. It's just you're strictly determining the number of questions. And that's because the basic mode, it says we'll choose questions based on actual test percentages. And if I click on that, this is going to give me a breakdown for the different standards for my content area. In this case, there's only 2, and obviously that's going to vary depending on what you teach. And so the idea behind this is that if there's a standard that is weighted more heavily than the others, the basic benchmark is going to take that into account, and it's going to choose more questions in those specific standards. So it will model this breakdown as closely as possible. And so if you're looking for a pre-made benchmark, this is going to be the closest thing that we have to a pre-made benchmark, is using the basic option. And if you choose basic, just because our system is choosing the questions for you doesn't mean that you will not have a chance to look at the questions and change any that you don't like. So you will have that option when we get to step 6. So the basic option is a great one for a beginning of the year diagnostic or different checkpoints throughout the year to assess students over all standards. What a lot of teachers will then do is to create custom benchmarks just throughout the school year, specifically over what you're teaching. And the reason for that is because custom allows you to go in and pick out what standard you want. And you'll have 10 questions to start off with. And you can click to load more questions at the bottom if you like to. And you'll get 10 more questions, and you can keep loading more until eventually you'll reach the end of questions for that standard. And so this just opens up our database to you so that you can go through and you can pick the questions that you like. And if you like a question, just use the checkbox to add it. If you can't see the entire question, if you click on it, this allows you to view the question with all of the answer choices. And if you like it, you can add it, and you can also browse the questions this way, which sometimes makes it a little bit easier to tell if you like the question or not. And once you close out of that, any of the questions that you checked are now going to be checked here. And you may notice that some of these questions have a little pink SA next to them. That is to indicate that the question could be used as a short answer question instead of multiple choice. And if I choose one of those questions, I have this extra checkbox to display as short answer. So if I click there, now students are going to have to type in their answer. And just like it sounds, these are very simple, straightforward questions so that the answers are automatically graded. You do not have to go back and grade them. We take into account some spelling, incorrections, and we also take into account alternate terms. But if you ever feel that a student should have received credit for their answer and they didn't, you can go in and override their answer to be correct if you need to. Now, after you've selected some questions, if you want to minimize that specific standard, you can see there's 7 questions, and then you can go into other ones and choose what you need to. By default, the questions are shown by popularity. That is how often they're actually used by teachers on benchmarks. However, if you want to search, by difficulty, or if you're looking, for short answer questions, you have some different ways that you can sort. So let's say I want the most difficult questions at the very top. So now right here, this is my most difficult question. And the way that I know that is with the little stats icon. It shows me what percent of students have answered this question correctly. And 6% is obviously very low. That would be extremely difficult. And as I go, through, that percentage is gradually increasing. So now I'm up to, 17%. If I switch this to low difficulty, now this is the easiest question at 54%. And that percentage will change and vary depending on your content area, specifically what standard you're looking at. Usually the easier questions are going to be in the 60, maybe 70% range, but that's usually the highest that we see it. All right, so I'm going to choose a few more questions here. And let's say as I'm going through and choosing questions, I find one that needs to be updated. I can use this feedback button over on the right, and this will go directly to our content specialist for this area. You can let them know exactly what the issue is, and then they'll be able to make that change and let you know as soon as that has been fixed. All right, so then down at the very bottom, you can add questions from another strand or another standard if you need to. That way you're not forced into just one. And so as you can see, the custom option really allows you to go through and pick out exactly which standards, which questions, how many questions. All of that is completely up to you. Now in the next step, this is what we call favorites. This is where you have a chance to add questions of your own if you would like to. If you say yes, you have a question here, a button here to author new question. You'll just go through here, and through each step you pick out what standard you're writing the question for. You can add an image if you'd like to. If this is an English based test, you can even add one of our passages. You can add some sort of prompt, your question itself, answer choices, the correct answer, and an explanation for students. So this is the one area on the site where we allow you to add questions of your own. So if you already have a bank of questions and you want to add them here, feel free to do that. And once you add them, they are always going to be saved right here for you. That way, if you want to build a benchmark in the future, you can just check to add that question. Also, in your favorites, if you have run across any questions on the site that you really like, you can add it to your favorites, and then it's going to show up in this area for you so that you have very quick access to that question. All right, I'm going to go to the next step, which is the option to add performance task. So if you would like to add any of these as part of your benchmark, you can. If I say yes, I'm just going to pick up my standard and see what performance task I have to choose from. And if I want to preview it, I can just click on it and see exactly what this would look like. And these are the same performance tasks that you can assign to your students separately. So if you've already assigned any of these to your students, it's going to let you know that. It will have the word assigned in pink just next to the title. So I'm going to choose this one and go to the next step, which are free response questions. Again, you do not have to add these if you don't need to. And pick out your standard. And then you have your free response questions to choose from, and if you click on one, you can see what this would look like for the students and that text box that they're working with. And as I mentioned earlier, the free response questions are not automatically graded, so you will have to go back and grade those later. We do, however, provide an answer key for all of them. That way, as you grade the student answer, you'll have the answer key right there alongside the students to help make that grading process go a little bit smoother. And if you are adding a free response question, you will have to assign a point value to it. That's just to make sure that you have a good balance of what your questions are worth and your free response. Right now, I think I had 11 questions. So if I were to keep my free response question at 10 points, roughly that's half of the benchmark because each question is worth 1 point and each performance task item is worth 1 point. So I may only want this to be worth maybe 3 questions if I don't have a ton of questions already. So you can adjust that depending on how much you want it to be worth. And then now in the very last step, which is preview, this is where you have a chance to go back through and just make sure that you're happy with all of the questions. If you have a question that you change your mind about, or maybe back in step 2 you chose basic and now you're first getting a chance to look through at what questions were chosen for you, you can go through and you can either remove that question altogether or you can click to replace it. And if you click to replace it, you're going to be given a few different options to choose from, still in that exact same standard, so you don't lose a question for that specific area that you need. And you can just choose that one and it swaps it out very easily. Also for these questions, you have the statistics here that you can look at. You have the feedback button to give us feedback, and you have that add to favorite star. So if this is a question that you really like and you want to be able to find it very easily on a benchmark in the future, just click to add it to favorites and it will ask you if you're sure. And now if I were to make a benchmark again, this question is going to show up in step 3 favorites. So it's very easy to find. Also, You have sections for performance tasks and free response questions if you've included any of those. And you can also turn anything into bonus. There's a checkbox on the right if you want to count that question as bonus. And when the student goes to take this benchmark, they are going to know that it is bonus when they get to that question. So then, assuming all of this looks okay, I'm going to go ahead and save the benchmark. Now the benchmark has been created. And at this point, I could go ahead and assign the benchmark if I were ready, or if I want time to be able to go back and make changes or add questions to it, I can always assign it later. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to go to benchmarks. Now here's the benchmark at the very top that I just created. For benchmarks, you do have this code, and really that's just a helpful way to identify it if you need to contact us. Students do not need that code because when you directly assign it to them, they'll just have a begin button. Now, benchmarks have lots of options compared to assignments. You have an answer key, which you can print. You can also archive a benchmark the same way that you can archive an assignment. You can assign a benchmark when you're ready. So once it does look okay, you can click to assign it, choose what classes you want to give it to, as well as your start and your end date. Just keep in mind that once one student has taken your benchmark, you can no longer edit that benchmark. So that's why you have to be really careful to assign it when it's truly good to go. You can also duplicate benchmarks if you want to reuse them. And once you have duplicate benchmarks or two benchmarks that are very similar to each other, you can compare them. You can also export your results very quickly to Excel. You can preview it as a student. You can print a benchmark if you need to. And you can also go into your settings. And so this is where, let's say once your students are done, you could then allow them to go back in and look at exactly which questions they missed. Okay, also all of our benchmarks and all of the assignments have a deactivate button. And that is because there may be times when you want to remove access for students. And if you no longer want them to be able to work on the benchmark, if you just click deactivate, it is going to gray it out. This notification lets me know that it is a shared benchmark, and so if I deactivate it, it's going to deactivate it across the board for all teachers. Let's say that's not really what I want to do. I just want to deactivate it for my students. So if that's the case, you would go into your assignments tab, because once you have assigned a benchmark, it's going to add it here in your assignments. Here is the benchmark I've assigned. I can see it right here. And so if I click deactivate, now it's grayed out. So that means that if a student were to log in, they will not see that assignment or that benchmark at all. And again, some teachers like to use that feature, after school if you don't want students to be able to work on something, and then you can just click activate when you're ready for them to have access to it again. So that is session 201 about how to create benchmarks and assignments. Now is a great time to practice, to actually go in and create your own assignment, whether it's going to be a single assignment that you create or a group assignment or both, as well as a benchmark. We'll hope that you continue in session 301 and look at how to access the results.